Hey everyone, thanks for having us. So I'm Matt Leacock, this is Alex Hague, and I want to shout out to my co-designer Matteo Manapace, who also designed Daybreak with me. So we're going to talk a little bit about the game and I guess use it as like a bit of a case study in sustainability. First, for people who don't know Daybreak or Emission, I'll probably use the two terms interchangeably. This is a game about stopping climate change. It's a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players, and you and your fellow players take on the role of world powers trying to tackle this problem. So this was a natural fit for me. I'm best known as the designer of Pandemic, and I took care of the pandemic, so now it's on to climate change. We thought the game would garner some attention, and this was actually something that was important to me. So I started thinking about doing a game about climate change in 2020, right in the depths of lockdown. And I started to think about, like, how can I make a more meaningful game? And climate change was right there. And I was also undergoing a lot of anxiety about climate. So I thought by studying it and trying to work out a game through it, that might also help me. And then if a game came out of it, it might help other people as well. While I was doing that, I was looking on Twitter and actually saw a gentleman named Matteo, who ultimately became the co-designer. And he was a co-op designer as well, also interested in climate. So I reached out to him, and we started a conversation. And that conversation, we met again the next week, and then the next week, and pretty soon we had agreed to design a game together. And I guess it was like 3 years later, we have Emission. But during that process, it became clear that we were designing the game, and we got some attention from it from the New York Times and so on. And it seemed like a game and an idea worthy of some attention. And again, just looking at the details of it, so what we're seeing right here is there's like 2 pieces of the game, 2 big pieces. One is around the solutions in the game. So we wanted to first capture a sense of how important it was, how many solutions there were, and how big a potential problem there is. This is the solution side. So there's like a couple hundred cards in the game that are all real-world solutions to climate problems. Each one of them has a QR code that points up to a website where you can learn more. You don't need to actually use the QR code. So we actually wanted to meet people where they were. If you're interested in climate, you could kind of dig through and learn more.
But please use the website because it was so much work.
It was a lot of work. Yeah, I think there's like 100,000 words on there, and it's now localized into how many languages?
Yeah. James Nathan, how many? We got to shrug. I think
yeah,
it's like
there's a bunch in process. Yeah.
Yeah, we're approaching, I think, 10 or so. But yeah, all of the localization partners, it's been incredible to see that they've not only wanted to localize the entire game, which it's a huge card-based comboing engine builder game with lots of text, but also, 10 times the text on the website, and all of them are so committed to the project that they really want to localize the website as well.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I want to emphasize that when we got started, one of the things that Matteo and I agreed on was that we wanted to make a really fun game, first and foremost. We didn't want to make a, quote, educational game, because we knew that people would run screaming away from that, especially, like, who turns to climate for a game, right? Let's go play Climate Crisis, the game, right? So we wanted to make a very fun game, but then we also really wanted to get across the huge variety of solutions for it. And so by playing the game, you kind of understand this huge array of solutions. And then if you go to the next slide, Alex, we've got here you can see the world and all the different carbon sinks. And then finally, there's this big thermometer, which shows how emissions accumulate and how those exacerbate crises. So on the one side, you learn about all the different solutions. On the other side, you learn about all the different potential crises.
And it's a really like just I feel like Matt maybe can't brag about his game, but it's just like the first time we encountered it, it's just such a beautifully elegant way to convey the movement of carbon into heat in the atmosphere, where you generate these carbon cubes, and the carbon cubes sort of build up on a thermometer, and the cubes become temperature bands of 0.1 degrees Celsius. And I remember the first time we played the game with Matt and Matteo, just like it was like the angels descended from heaven or whatever, just like seeing like how perfectly that all fit together in an educational way, while not, like Matt said, not being so educational focused or anything. It felt like you know, something like Pandemic or Spirit Island, where it felt so integrated into the gameplay that it wasn't like, oh, they made this sacrifice in order to properly model climate. They just did so much work to make the actual modeling fun in the first place. It was really astonishing to see.
Yeah, I think it does what good games do, and that, I mean, you learn by playing it. You can kind of feel when you dump all of those wooden cubes into the atmosphere, you actually kind of sense the weight of it, and then you see how those accumulate kind of viscerally, tacitly by playing, as opposed to, like, I don't know, reading an article about it. You actually experience it, and you understand it at a deeper level by playing the game. So while developing it, it took at least a couple years to design, and Matteo and I spent a lot of time trying to model it. We did a lot of research. We did a lot of prototyping. The game took, like, I think when you came on, it took like 4.5 hours to play. We knew it was too big. It had a lot of different currencies in it. Early versions of it had whiteboards, and Matteo and I knew that we were not going to put whiteboards in a game about stopping climate change, because, you know, plastic coating, markers that dry out, it just didn't seem like a good idea. But we gave ourselves some latitude while designing it to, like, provide some scaffolding, some, like, short-term, like, interim solutions, so we could find the game first, and then we could, like, at an early stage, and then sort of in a mid stage, we started to look at how could we make this thing a sustainable product, because we knew that with a topic like this, sustainability and, like, making this a sustainable product was not optional. Like, we needed to really show that it could be done, and that was one of the great things about working with Alex, right? When you guys came on, you really shared those same values.
Yeah, exactly. And we had my partner at CMYK, Justin, is an environmental lawyer, and I've worked in the environmental NGO field earlier in my career. And so a dream of mine had always just been to make a game focused around climate, because I think we would always have these long digressive conversations around how, like, there was such a lack of hope in just sort of media, art, any sort of work around climate, that we thought there would be a huge opportunity to make a card game or a board game or whatever it would be that presented a really hopeful vision for what it means to solve or mitigate climate change. And so we had sort of been kicking the tires on trying to find a design partner to work on this project with, and we actually ended up chatting with Elizabeth Hargrave, and she was like, oh, I actually know someone who's working on one, sort of coyly, like not wanting to give away that it was Matt, maybe. And I'm like, do you mind introducing us? Do you want to ask them? And so, because she had, like, really positive things to say about it then. And so we got introduced through her.
If I can interrupt, I mean, one of the reasons why she knew is because I asked her if she would want to co-design with me, and she politely demurred. She wasn't sure how she could make climate change fun. But yeah, it was funny that we both approached her.
Yeah, it's funny to hear in retrospect. I feel like there are a lot of game designers that are, like, particularly, like, jealous of Matt and Matteo's accomplishment, just because it's a really hard thing to do, to make a game that has a sort of, like, social thesis and correctly models a complex, like, physical process in the world, and is also a fun game. And so I think in addition to us, we're, and other designers, I think, really are left in awe of, like, what the final project is. But yeah, when CMYK came on, maybe as penance for all the plastic and Wavelength, we really wanted to make a game that was totally plastics free. Obviously, knowing the theme of the game, it's sort of a non-negotiable, right? Like, you're almost signing yourself up for it whether you want to or not. And so very early on, we brought on a sustainability consultant and sort of gave her she wasn't a gamer, she just worked was a grad student at the time at Berkeley in their sustainability department, and really just jumped in. We gave her the lay of the land on, like, here's how the game works. And so it was interesting to see, because some of the things that she flagged for us were the most predictable things in the world, around, like, using FSC certified wood, don't use plastics in it. But then you'll also see things like, the things that were in sort of, like, blinking red letters is, like, you have a bag in the game. You, like, really shouldn't use a bag. If you're familiar with the game, there's a die roll that happens every round. And so Before the die existed, it was a sort of a really light bag builder mechanic, and so we had to go back, and Matt and Mateo we like sort of flagged that issue.
Yeah, we got this new design constraint. I guess it was pretty late. I mean, the design was pretty much done. We had a system where you're pulling out planetary effects from a cloth bag and putting them on the board. And we had to stop and think about, like, okay, how do we do this out of bag? Actually, we talked with our advisors about different ways to model this stuff, and they just suggested a die, just rolling a die. And we looked and evaluated it and realized that it was not only a really good metaphor, they liked the metaphor, but it made the game better. So it made the game better. It was more sustainable. And there was nothing not to like, so that's what we move forward with. I think it's kind of an interesting way of looking at, like, sometimes constraints can be really helpful for the design process.
Yeah, and I think it like reinforces the fact that like there's no one true answer to game design in a lot of ways. It sometimes feels that way, but actually there are things there are adjacencies to a lot of the different like components that get used in games, and there's not one true answer to it. Or if there is, it's maybe not the one that you expect it to be. So in terms of fast forwarding a little bit to the actual finished product of Daybreak, in addition to just getting all the no plastics down, you realize that a game includes things that aren't the components, which is the sort of structural packaging aspect of a game. And that's really where a lot of plastics come into a game. That's even like, every half the games you open, you'll open it and see, and there's like a fact tray or, which is like a molded plastic tray where the cards fit in, or plastic bags or whatever it is. Like you just sort of take as a given that there are these like storage solutions that you realize are all plastics based. And so we knew really, we knew from the start that we weren't going to be able to use any of those things. And so how do we, in a game like Daybreak that has like, that's an engine builder with a lot of complex components, like how do we keep everything stored properly? And so, I think we were really inspired by seeing like, humble takeout containers and things like that are these pulp trays that, noticing that like, I mean, if you can get your burrito in one, like they can't be that expensive to make. And so,
and if they're good enough for Apple, right? I mean,
exactly.
Apple packages stuff in pressed pulp and it looks really nice.
Exactly. And so the thing that you learn about those things, though, is that they have like really high order quantities, and you're paying for molding fees for making them, and you want them to be precision fit for your box so everything fits together really nicely. And so it is that part of it, like, not going to lie, like it's definitely a more expensive process. It takes more time, but the thing that I would really love to see in the industry, and we've done this with our molds, is just anybody who does it just to like essentially open source it for any other publisher that works with your manufacturer. So we were really explicit in telling our manufacturing broker in China, if anybody wants to use these pulp trays besides us, they have total free reign to do it. They're not proprietary to us anymore. We'll pay the upfront fee, and if people want to use this instead of plastics, please do. Because we really like, there's the direct impact of Daybreak the game, where we're trying to reduce the carbon footprint of the thing we produced, but the more important thing is the indirect impact of influencing other trends within the tabletop gaming industry, which you see all over the place being like moving in a much more positive direction now in terms of the sustainability aspect. The other aspect of the packaging that's really a difficult thing to figure out is just how do you wrap it up and make sure it doesn't open and fall apart in transit on the shelf and things like that. So this is just our version of a sealing sticker that we used instead of shrink wrap. But again, like none of these things these are all sort of mitigations and not perfect solutions, because these things even have their glue, their adhesives. They're essentially like little bits of plastic products. There's a certain amount that will just sort of inevitably be in any project, and your goal as in doing this level of sustainability is to just keep it to a minimum while knowing it'll never be exactly zero, just because it's a physical thing in the world. There'll be transportation emissions, there'll be all these other things, but to try to minimize it as much as you can.
Yeah, but I think it's important to realize that you can do this kind of thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a massive sacrifice. I mean, we were like super encouraged that the game was nominated and won Kennerspiel. So I mean, I think that for me, it just showed that you can do this kind of thing. You can still create a fun game. It can still find an audience and actually be really, really successful. So that was super encouraging that the game did as well as it did, and we'd hope that that would help bring the message that you can make sustainable games and really still be successful.
Yeah, and the other really interesting thing about the German edition of the game specifically, we have a great relationship with Spiele. We've published games with them before, and they were really excited to localize the game, not just in terms of translating it, but also they wanted to manufacture it locally. And so they did an entirely different manufacturing process through Ludofact in Germany. So the actual emissions of emission, the German version of Daybreak, is even less, is even lower than ours, which we have to sort of use cargo ships transporting from China. They're just doing, they're manufacturing locally and just doing an amazing job sourcing that, and they just put in such an incredible amount of work to make that happen. And I think we're really like proud of them for just like going just so far above and beyond what we expected anyone else to work on with us. And Matt talked about this a little bit, but again with the indirect impacts, this is just a screenshot of our website where the QR codes take you, and so each card in the game has a dedicated project page, and again, like what we're hoping to achieve with this is not only the fact that you can learn more about this, but we would love for other game publishers to try these sort of like web-based models to like when they make games that are about, say, wind power or something like that, to actually provide resources and calls to action for things to do after you've experienced the game and see if it'll help you connect to wider causes. Then the other thing is, finally, we sort of wanted to situate Daybreak in the broader context of sustainability in gaming because, we're just sort of one piece of one project in the world, and wanted to specifically call out Stonemaier for having such a systematic approach to making their projects more sustainable. It was like a huge inspiration for us. As you can see, Jamie Stegmaier has like color coded all of the various, like, here are all the aspects that like could be more sustainable. Here are the ones that are green that they've done. Here are the ones that are red that they can't do. Here are the ones that are yellow that are in process. Looking through that, like now having like worked with sustainability consulting, like they clearly are thinking a lot in the same way in a way that's always been such an inspiration to us. And then the other project that I think you all might be familiar with is Earthborn Rangers, which is similarly like hyper ambitious in the lack of use of plastics. That also really like spurred us on to try to really remove as much plastic as possible from the game. And I think they've described their game as one you could like literally bury and it would decompose. And so hopefully someone's experimenting with that and we can see that in a few years. But yeah, like knowing that there are other people out there doing things that are like as ambitious or even more ambitious than what Daybreak's done is really encouraging. And I just hope Daybreak, Stonemaier's games, Earthborn Rangers, and all of those are really just the starting point for a broader movement in the entire games industry to move towards sustainability, removing plastics, removing highly sort of polluting aspects of games like textiles and things like that.
Yeah, so we didn't want to. Actually, we just want to spend more time on Q&A, so we kept this relatively short. So we'd love to have any kind of questions you have about the development of the game, about any of the sustainability topics, any of that.
Thank you. Have any other manufacturers asked you about your project, how you did it, or anything like that?
Sorry, what was that?
Have other manufacturers already contacted you about how you did it or what they could do?
We've had a couple inquiries, but honestly, not that many.
Hi. I wondered if you included any political aspects, because it's a big thing in climate change, is getting governments and political agents on side. So I'm wondering if there's any element in the game that sort of brings that in, and whether that can be addressed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So we did a lot of research on the projects. Some of the solutions are controversial, I'd say. Here in Germany, nuclear is not something that people are turning to, as their first choice, I would say. There's other aspects like geoengineering, which is controversial, like around the world. So some of the solutions. Then there's the aspects of like the nature of cooperation. We kind of have this large conceit in the game that the players are world powers that are going to cooperate, but we don't force cooperation. And we also wanted to come at it with kind of a point of view that cooperation is important and possible, but again, it's up to the players to do it. We didn't want to create an antagonist that was actually a player, because that really changes the emotional valence of the game. It really becomes a totally different genre, almost. It's not a cooperative game if one player is the antagonist against everyone else. But at the same time, we looked at, like, how do we model the correct antagonist for the game? And so we talked with, like, for example, Bill McKibben was one of our advisors, really well known in the climate movement. And his advice was basically for the antagonist to model it as first inertia, and second the fossil fuel industry. And we thought we had inertia down pretty well. It's hard to decarbonize, and it takes time, and your investments gradually pay off, and there's a positive feedback loop. As you invest, it gets more and more effective over time. So as you overcome that inertia. And then we found ways to kind of embody the fossil fuel industry in our crisis cards, because we needed to manage the game's complexity to some extent. So I don't know if that answers your question directly. Basically, we just didn't want to be real preachy about it. We wanted to give a whole range of solutions and not say geoengineering's bad or nuclear is bad, but you could learn about some of their limitations through play. So there might be more regulation tags you need to roll out before nuclear is more effective, for example, or geoengineering, you understand its risks, because in the game it's risky, right? If you invest a lot and you're really careful, there might be a place in the end of the game when you're almost across the finish line. But if you try that as a solution early in the game, you're gonna just lose. It's not gonna happen. So basically, just kind of turn to realism on one end, and then we just had to kind of like model a world we wanted to see to some extent on the other hand.
And it really does give you like a space to explore all the different potential approaches to solving climate change in a way that I don't think is sort of prescriptive, in a way that you could otherwise be like, you could imagine a version of this game that's just like incredibly like pro-nuclear or pro-geoengineering or pro-degrowth or whatever it is. And I think one of the really nice parts of Daybreak is that it lets you explore each of those things and sort of see on your own like what types of impacts it has built into it. And really it is sort of ultimately a game about all-in solutions and built off of like really good climate modeling and everything. And so seeing how you could, one game nuclear could be the solution, another game just really going all in on solar and wind could be the solution, another game where things are going particularly badly, I guess geoengineering could be the solution.
No,
but it's
actually,
like last
it
resort.
can't. Yeah, it's never going to be the solution.
Yeah, I think
it can buy you some time for
Yeah,
later.
in every playtest, I think I've been like tried to do it just to like see if it's possible. And you're right that it's like you would have to have some really good die rolls.
It's like maybe 1 out of 20 games. It's useful, but yeah, you're not gonna win.
Da hinten links, oder? One more question? Yeah, any more?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I'm actually I do a bunch of teaching in climate change, and I'm looking at possibilities for incorporating your game, because I think it hits a lot of the topics really well. And I was excited to see that resources for teachers might be coming down the line. So I wanted to ask what your plans were for that, or if there were plans.
You want to take?
Yeah, absolutely. Matteo and I were just on a call recently with someone who's really excited to sort of like lead the charge more in terms of like organizing those resources and everything. But like after the talk, please like would love your like contact information so we can keep you in touch on it.
Do we have more questions? Yeah, over there.
Thanks. Have you done a life cycle analysis of your game? Just so production-wise, scope 3?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was exactly what we were looking to do with our sustainability analyst. We didn't really have the like funds or time to do the full LCA, but that was like basically we did like a skinny version of it, I would say, like with Ruth Meza. But that was, I think, like the gold standard. I think in the future for sustainable analysis of games are these LCAs, these life cycle analyses.
Okay, thanks.
How much of a factor was the crowdfunding campaign at the beginning before you did the regular retail stuff? Was that like, if the crowdfunding would have gone badly, would you have killed the project or would you still have seen through
Yeah,
it?
It would have been a bummer, I guess. I mean,
It would have sucked.
fortunately, we didn't have to kill the project. It did very well. But I don't. I have such conflicted feelings about crowdfunding. I mean, CMYK got its start doing crowdfunding like so many other game companies. I think we use it very strategically now for projects we want to have a little bit of a bigger like publicity or marketing lift for, and Daybreak felt like a natural fit because like Matt is such an amazing designer. People sort of follow his work. It's a game with a theme that is interesting to people outside of the games industry, and so we really wanted to. We worked with BackerKit on the crowdfunding project, and we're happy that it did really well. But I think it's such a passion project for all of us. I think like if it had had 0 backers, we probably still would have made it.
Thank you.
So, any more questions? We still have a lot of time, so feel free. Yeah, over here.
Thanks for the nice presentation. I had a question. You talked a lot about like the industry moving forward that solution. How realistic you think it's actually going to be, like, let's say, impact that's going to be felt? Because like we have these few nice games. You mentioned Stonemeyer that trying to go there, but how you think the industry, board game industry as a whole, will behave on the future time? Is it realistic that like we'll see, like, let's say, majority of the games being produced sustainably?
I could give you my impressions. I mean, I'm just one gamer here like yourself. I think consumers' tastes may gradually change as awareness becomes wider. I mean, I picked up Catan, Rise of Humanity, I think, and it has this very, very nice insert that's all pressed pulp. And they've made these wonderful choices where the bagged materials are paper. And as a consumer, I like both of those. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It feels warm. It's got a nice papery feel. Like I would take a wooden component over a plastic one most of the time already. And if I don't have to fight to like pick the plastic off a pack of cards, I'm a really happy person. So I think if it's shown as, wow, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's a better experience because our experience with like creating these products gets better and better, then it's not going to feel like a sacrifice, and it's going to be a no-brainer as a publisher to do it. And then we'll see sort of this virtuous cycle of consumers demanding it, publishers being happy to deliver on it, that sort of thing. So that's my hope, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not cynical about this at all. I think the audience for it is really excited about sustainable components, as you can sort of see happening already. It's really not that often, like, not that big of a sacrifice. And I think, like, will we ever eliminate plastics from the tabletop gaming industry? Probably not. But like, I think that shouldn't even be the goal. The goal should be to use them very deliberately and cautiously and carefully. because they're still just experiences you want to craft that use those materials. And ideally, we move into a phase where like people are using bioplastics and things that are more sustainable. But I think it's very realistic for 50% or more games to not really have any plastic components. Whether shrink wrap still exists or everyone switches to sort of like sticker seals, like I'm not quite sure about that. But in terms of the movement of the whole industry, like every other publisher I talk to seems to be taking this all very seriously and to not be like behind the scenes like groaning about having to do it or anything. Like there's clear enthusiasm on the like publisher side, just from a like a moral point of view, and also just I think, you know, seeing where the audience for their games is going to.
So that's it, right? You're happy? Oh, over there, one more.
Thinking back to what you just said about like the plastic wrap and the shrink and the tape on the edges, is there anything that you learned from the process that the current board game industry does well, or perhaps other infrastructure has to change? I'm thinking specifically because, you know, you all had the issue where the Amazon infrastructure would beat the heck out of the box, you know, and it would show up, and then people would return it, which would cause more carbon emissions than what it originally did. And so do you think that some other infrastructure has to change in order to take advantage of some of the improvements you've made?
Yeah, I think there are some really thorny issues at the very end of getting rid of plastics from packaging in particular. So I think some of the things are just so invisible to the end user of a board game box, for instance. So yeah, there's like essentially a plastic film over every single board game box that you own. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you that. But with Daybreak, we actually like tried to ship out the Kickstarter copies we made with not even that. And I assume that's also like what the Earthborn Rangers folks and everything do as well. But I think they wrapped theirs and like they did some sort of paper wrap. But yeah, I mean, things like that get much harder to solve because there are just these like intractable durability concerns. Like the box, there's something very unique about the board game industry in that the box is part of the package. It's almost like the book industry where it's just a component in itself. And so you can't just sort of send someone a box that's entirely dinged up because it's a thing that exists on their shelf and is like a nice design object that they own, hopefully. And so you fight constantly, apart from this entire environmental question, you fight with places like Amazon who just sort of treat board game boxes as containers, thinking like a beauty product or like a food product or something. You will like, oh, we can like beat the hell out of this box because they'll just open it up and take the thing that they want out and then throw the box away. And so you just, you know, board games I think are particularly like jammed up in that one area trying to like figure out that last part. But if that's the last thing that we have to solve, like I feel great about where we are as an industry. And so I'll take like every other component is good. There's just this slight packet like plastic film on a box. But yeah, it was learning those things was really interesting and sort of like seeing the process of that. Also the corners are sort of like there's adhesive tape that essentially like holds all the corners in place as well. And those are another sort of invisible thing. If you're ever like throwing away a board game box or something like that, if you break down the corners, you'll like see a piece of tape sort of like snap out.
All right. Thank you guys for this great talk.
Thank you.